How do you? Temporary. Wishing.
Bruno Darou nous a rejoint. Bonjour Bruno.
Bonjour Julien.
Donald Trump enchaîne les meetings. Il nous refait le coup de 2016.
Voilà, il vous refait le coup de 2016 et encore plus d'ailleurs, puisque les sondages décidément le placent derrière Joe Biden, à la fois au niveau national, on l'a dit souvent, et aussi dans les fameux États clés qu'il sillonne là aujourd'hui, le Pennsylvanie, l'État clé des États clés, si je puis dire, de Keystone State, comme on dit aux États-Unis, 20 grands électeurs, qui fait toujours basculer le vote d'un côté ou de l'autre avec la Floride. Donc là, Donald Trump, effectivement, il fait 4 ou 5 meetings, je crois, enfin, à un rythme absolument effréné, parce qu'il sait quand même qu'il est un peu à la traîne dans les sondages, qu'il veut jusqu'au bout y croire, qu'il veut jusqu'au bout mobiliser son électorat, en espérant que demain, dans les urnes, eh bien, comme en 2016, à quelques milliers de voix près, il va l'emporter. Par exemple, en Pennsylvanie, il avait emporté de 44 000 voix, ce qui, sur un État qui est composé de 12 millions d'habitants, est peu de choses. Et il y avait eu 6 millions de votants, donc vous voyez, 44 000 voix, c'est rien, mais ça suffit à faire basculer le système et surtout à rafler les grands électeurs qui sont en fait décisifs pour désigner le président.
On est enfin à la fin de la campagne, enfin, entre nous.
Peut-être pas tant que ça.
Non, c'est vrai, on attend de ce que dira Donald Trump aujourd'hui. Bon, ça a été une campagne hyper tendue, avec des coups bas. Il y a eu des intimidations aussi de la part des supporters. Est-ce qu'il y a le risque que ça dégénère au-delà du 3 novembre ?
Alors, il y a un risque, clairement, à l'issue d'une campagne, effectivement, qui aura vu un pays polarisé, divisé comme jamais, quand même. On a vu des tensions entre partisans des deux camps, comme on n'avait pas vu ça depuis je sais pas, une cinquantaine d'années. Donc, un pays extrêmement... on les estime à 5 ou 6%. Ça veut il y avait eu 6 millions de votants, donc vous voyez, 44 000 voix, c'est rien, mais ça suffit. Populaire est arrivé derrière Donald Trump, et
rally, a separate rally. And later today, we're expecting to see former President Barack Obama trying to close the case for Joe Biden, who, on his own, made a separate appearance last week. So all of this really just underscores just how important this state is in the race. I'm going to talk quickly about early voting. We've seen record numbers here in the Peach State. In fact, nearly 3.9 million people have cast a ballot. That means that that's more than almost the number that we saw back in 2016. And keep in mind, early voting is over. So all of it comes down to Tuesday, guys.
Thank you, Blaine. Staying in the South, Texas has voted only Republicans into statewide office for more than 25 years. But our NBC News political unit now rates the state as a toss-up, with Biden's VP pick, Senator Kamala Harris, spending precious campaign time there over the weekend. NBC News correspondent Garrett Hake reports on the battle for Texas.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Savannah. Good morning. Yeah, look, the early voting period is now over in Texas, and more than 9 million Texans cast their votes early. That is blows the doors off any projections here. It's more people than voted in the state in its entirety in 2016. It's 10% of the early votes cast anywhere in the country. And it's effectively broken the models for what Texas is supposed to look like in an election year. The campaigns, at least the Biden campaign, is fairly honest that they don't really know what this state's going to look like when all the votes are counted. The Trump campaign has said they don't see Texas as a battleground state at all. That's why they haven't sent their candidate here. But in interviews and conversations I've had with activists, party leaders, congressional candidates, there are battles being fought here for the Texas State House, for the House of Representatives. There are a number of competitive seats, and they tell part of the story. Why? Because they are in the suburbs of these big cities. I've covered Texas politics for a long time, and the battlegrounds keep getting farther and farther from the cities and out further into the suburbs and the exurbs around those big cities. It's all driven by population growth here, immigration from abroad, immigration from states like California, roughly 1,000 people a day moving into Texas over the last couple of years. And Democrats see those changes as the kind of thing that might narrow this state down from one that went for Ted Cruz over Beto O'Rourke by 250,000 votes or so in 2018 to one that just might go for Joe Biden and make this state Democratic blue for the first time since 1976. Joe and Savannah.
Thanks so much, Garrett. Also in Texas, a federal court will hear the conservative-led case to throw out drive-through ballots today. The state Supreme Court over the weekend approved counting the more than 120,000 drive-in ballots, but a federal court will still have an emergency hearing on the request today, sparking criticism from voting rights leaders. Conservative activists want to throw out the ballots and claim the early voting method violates the Constitution. The state Supreme Court rejected a similar challenge last month. Heading now to one of the closely watched battleground states, North Carolina. It's one of the key Senate seats that Democrats are hoping to flip and a must-win for President Trump. NBC News correspondent Morgan Radford joins us right now. She's at the Democratic Party headquarters in North Carolina. Morgan, the Democratic candidate Cal Cunningham is consistently leading in the polls. Though just a month ago, Dems were worried about fallout from Cunningham admitting to sending sexual text messages to a woman who's not his wife. What's the state of that race now?
The state of the race, Savannah, is that this is a hot race. This is the state to watch. And what's fascinating is that if you look at those poll numbers, you see Cunningham leading by almost a 10-point spread. But that's still really within the margin of error. So this is anyone's race. This is likely to be a race to the finish. But as you mentioned, there was that sexting scandal on Cunningham's side. And then when it comes to that vulnerable Republican he's running against, Tom Tillis, he tested positive for coronavirus just last month. But what's interesting is that with all of these kind of late-breaking scandals and news happening here within that race, it really hasn't changed. Those polls are still kind of locked in an actual dead heat between those candidates. And this is still on track to be the most expensive U.S. Senate race in history. They've already spent north of $233 million. That's surpassing the $213 million record that Florida set back in 2018. So right now, this is anyone's race, but it's also one of the most critical swing state races in the country. This could affect the balance of power, not just in North Carolina, but in the United States of America, because as we know, Democrats in the Senate are hoping to flip at least 3 Senate seats so that they can regain that balance of power. And this is the state they're looking at to help them do that, Savannah.
Now, President Trump's also been making a big push in North Carolina, visiting the state yesterday and another rally scheduled for later today. How are Republican officials there feeling about the state of the race?
We spoke to a Republican official today, and he said they are cautiously optimistic. I mean, think about their ground game here, Savannah. The president has been here nearly a dozen times. As you mentioned, he's here today. Yesterday, Vice President Mike Pence was here, and that's why the Democrats are also reacting. The Democrats are saying, look, they're focusing on their 2018 playbook. They're focusing on health care. They're focusing on jobs. They're focusing on education. But the Republicans say, look, our top three priorities, according to what they think people in this state want to see, they want to see the economy reopen safely. They want to see the country get back to normal, and they want to see children going to school. So that's sort of what they're focusing on right now. But let's be very clear, Savannah. Trump needs North Carolina to get to the White House. He all but must win this state. This is a state that he won by a margin of less than 4 points, less than 200,000 actual votes here. But he's actually losing support among the very people who helped put him in office. That's college-educated white voters, women, voters in the suburbs. And those are exactly the voters that Joe Biden is now trying to scoop up. And he's also trying to bolster his support here in North Carolina with black voters. We're standing here in Mecklenburg County. That's where a bulk of a lot of the state's black voters are in metropolitan areas like here in Charlotte. So the question is, will that make up the difference? Savannah?
Morgan, you mentioned people wanting their kids back in school, which is, of course, part of the fallout from the coronavirus. And North Carolina has been hit very hard by the pandemic. How's that affecting the election process there?
Yeah, I mean, this state, my home state, has been hit hard. They've seen now the second and third highest numbers they've seen since the pandemic began just in the past few weeks. So it's something that people here on the ground are grappling with every single day. And we're seeing that in the numbers. This state has had an historic turnout, right? 4.5 million people have already cast their ballots. And when it comes to just those mail-in ballots requested, that's been 6 times higher this year than in 2016, which is interesting because it's also pulling out different types of voters, right? In the state of North Carolina, early voting is typically associated with white voters. White voters tend to vote earlier here in this state. Black voters tend to go to the polls on Election Day. But we're seeing black voters mailing in their ballots. There was an issue earlier on where they were seeing those ballots rejected. They had to correct them. They were being rejected at 4 times the rate of white voters here in the state. They had what's called a curing period where they had to make sure their signatures matched, et cetera, where they could resend in those ballots. But right now, according to the state, they said that they think they will have 97% of the votes in by Election Day. Wow. But of course, you mentioned the pandemic. There was a late-breaking Supreme Court decision that said that as long as those ballots are postmarked by November 3rd, they will have until November 12th to be counted. But still, as we mentioned, election officials say, don't worry. We know that November 12th is the day, but we do think that 97% of those votes will be counted on Tuesday, Savannah.
97% counted right then. Thank you so much, Morgan.
Of course.
More than 51 million Americans voted by absentee ballot so far in this election. We were just hearing about some records from Morgan. And some battleground states like Michigan are likely to keep us waiting for results since election workers can't actually start counting those ballots until Election Day. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns joins us now from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Dasha, I know you spent a lot of time there, so tell us, what exactly does pre-processing mean for Michigan? What are they allowed to do?
Hey, Savannah, good morning. A very different story here in Michigan than what you heard from Morgan and North Carolina. The majority of the vote will come in on election night in that state. Not likely to happen here in Michigan, but election workers did get a little bit of relief. They are allowed to start pre-processing at 10 a.m. today, only in jurisdictions, though, Savannah, of over 25,000. So those areas that are going to have a bigger bulk of absentee ballots. Now, what that means is they can begin opening those absentee envelopes. They cannot count anything. They cannot even take the absentee ballot out of the envelope, but they can take a look at the number on the absentee ballot stub and see if that matches with the number on the envelope. That might sound really small, really insignificant, but this process is incredibly manual. Every part of it takes time. And so any dent that they can make in that massive volume of absentee ballots ahead of time is going to make a difference, Savannah.
Now, the processing center where you are is going to be handling all the absentee ballots for Grand Rapids, which is at least 50,000 ballots. When do election officials there think that they'll have results? You just mentioned that each part is really labor intensive. It's manual labor. How long is this going to take?
Yeah, about 53,000 returned in Grand Rapids. In Kent County as a whole, about 175,000 returned. The elections director in this county tells me they're hoping maybe Wednesday morning, probably more likely into Wednesday afternoon. And that, Savannah, is if everything goes smoothly. If no tabulators go down, which local clerks have been telling me that is their nightmare scenario. Some of these jurisdictions only have one tabulator that they are relying on. So any sort of kink in that process can slow things down. And again, this is manual. It is all done by hand. I want you to hear from Peggy Sattler. She's the Byron Township clerk. She's been helping us out a lot over the last couple of months to take a look inside this process. Take a listen to why she is asking for some patience.
It's going to take some time because everything is very methodical, and it's just going to, they're just going to have to be patient because we're trying as fast as we can, but at the same time, I don't want them to not go through the steps that are necessary to make sure that there's no problems with the tabulators or with the numbers. So I'd rather have the workers that day err on the side of slower instead of trying to speed through and then have a problem and have to redo the entire precinct.
And Savannah, I want to hammer home that point that Peggy made. If it takes time out of states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, where election workers can't start counting until tomorrow morning, that does not mean anything wrong is going on. There's nothing fraudulent. It is simply the way the process works in these states. Savannah?
All those states that were the Great Blue Wall that we're waiting to hear what's going to happen from. Now, Dasha, both campaigns visited Michigan this weekend, trying to make a last-minute pitch to voters. President Trump and Vice President Pence are back again today, along with quite a few other states. What are the campaign's final messages to voters there?
Yeah, Savannah, we're getting a little bit of deja vu from 2016. Donald Trump made Grand Rapids, Kent County, his final stop on the campaign trail in the last election. He is doing it again, which is interesting because there are a lot of folks who say Michigan is all but lost. Joe Biden has been steadily ahead in most polls here. But Trump is making not one, but two campaign stops here today. So he's trying to make that final pitch. Kent County in particular is a critical area. There is a reason that I've come back here many times this year as a part of our County to County series. It used to be a Republican stronghold. It has since become more purple. And even over the last 4 years, you've seen demographic shifts here. The suburbs have become more diverse. So both candidates vying for voters here. Not a lot of undecideds left, but looks like the president will be trying to make that final pitch here tonight. Savannah.
Dasha, our honorary Michigan resident, thank you so much for all your reporting from there.
Coming up, COVID-19 changing college admissions.
Why the pandemic has some students scrambling to meet school deadlines. Next on Morning News Now.
I'm going to drive down to the American Airlines Center and I'm going to cast my early vote. Don't wait till November 3rd. Know where and when you can early vote. It's the right thing to do.
Hey guys, I'm Janelle Monáe, and guess what? I voted already. It's so important this year for everyone to make their voice heard, no matter what might get in the way. I recommend doing it early so you don't have to keep thinking about it. Vote.
The journey has taken us here through a campaign of unexpected twists and turns. From a global pandemic to civil unrest to an incumbent president diagnosed with the coronavirus. With the election of our lifetimes upon us, each day brings more surprises. And whatever happens, we'll be with you every step of the way, wherever this journey takes us next.
You ready to go to work?
I'm so ready to go to work.
She's Joe Biden's choice to be next in line. But who is Kamala Harris? Join me, Joy Reid, as I explore her life's journey from Oakland to Washington on my 6-part podcast, Kamala, Next in Line. New episodes every Monday. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts.
Wherever you are going to vote, there might be a line this year. Bring something to sit on. Bring snacks. Bring water. Bring a mask for yourself. Bring an extra mask or two, maybe, in case somebody else forgets theirs. Charge your phone. Bring an extra battery if you've got one. Dress comfy. Bring a jacket. Go with friends or family. Make a plan. Over-plan. If you have overplanned, you can send me hate mail after the election saying, Maddo, you made me overplan.
As Election Day nears and the race for the White House intensifies, Today cuts through the noise to cover the issues that matter most. From where the candidates stand to how to cast your ballot safely. What you need to know every morning on Today.
Watch what they do, not what they say.
Protests broke out. The coronavirus pandemic.
The story.
Emergency approval to treat COVID-19 with plasma. Many questions remain about how well it works.
From every angle.
How much of the increased tension was due to the militias that came here?
On the ground.
Deadly western wildfires in California.
Entire communities were also wiped off the map.
And in depth.
One of the big concerns is indoor air quality. What are you doing to address that?
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Prescription drug prices have risen sharply in recent years. NBC News correspondent Simone Boyce reports on what both presidential candidates are planning to do about it.
Lowering the cost of prescription drugs, that's something we can all get behind, right? Well, let's see what the candidates are saying about that and find out whether the rhetoric matches reality. Prescription drugs are extremely expensive in America, more expensive than anywhere else in the developed world. That's because our government allows pharmaceutical companies to set their own drug prices instead of regulating them like other countries do. Now, the drug companies claim this is what makes us a leader in innovation. Okay, on to the candidates. In July, President Trump signed 4 executive orders that he claimed would cut drug prices significantly.
We're doing tremendous prescription drug price reductions. Tremendous. It could be over 50%.
One of these executive orders plans to eliminate Medicare drug rebates. Another order requires insulin to be made cheaper for low-income patients. And a third claimed to make it easier to import cheaper drugs from outside the country. Now, the 4th executive order got a bit of an update in September. It's been dubbed the Favored Nations Clause, and it would ensure that Medicare pays the same for Part B drugs as other developed nations. Now, Part B drugs usually refers to medications that aren't self-administered, like chemotherapy.
I'm going with favored nations, which no president has the courage to do. Prices will be coming down 80 or 90%.
All of this sounds great, but it's heavy on optics and skimpy on details. It's still unclear how this would be enforced or how much savings would actually be passed on to American patients. Trump claims he's responsible for a dramatic decrease in drug prices.
We took drug prices. Last year was the first year in 52 years where prices went down. I'm very proud of that, but it was just a little bit. But they didn't go up, but they went down.
The administration points to this consumer price index for prescription drugs, which shows that the cost curve is bending down. And that is probably a good sign. But it's not anywhere close to a 50% reduction as Trump promised. And drug prices are notoriously hard to measure. That indicator we just showed you doesn't include new drugs and also isn't great at measuring the actual out-of-pocket costs to consumers. And the president pledged to veto a plan from the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives that would ambitiously overhaul the whole drug pricing system. The Trump administration is opposed to one of the core tenets of the plan, allowing the government to negotiate with drug companies. Now, that initiative will probably die in the Senate, but depending on what happens with the election, a Biden presidency could bring it back to life.
People deserve to have affordable health care, period. Period.
That's because Biden plans to repeal a law on the books that prevents Medicare from negotiating with drug manufacturers to lower prices. He also wants to facilitate production of generics, appoint an independent review board to figure out fair pricing for specialty drugs, and tax drug manufacturers who participate in outrageously high pricing schemes.
We're going to make sure we reduce the premiums and reduce drug prices.
That seems like it could be a challenge, given the fact that Biden had a chance to make a real dent in this issue when he was trying to get the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010. The Obama administration struck an early deal with the pharmaceutical industry, which did not help lower the cost of medication. Looking forward, Biden also wants to make it easier to access imported drugs from other countries. Wait. That's what Trump wants to do too. Trump and Biden actually agree on something? That can't be right.
Time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
CNBC's Seema Modi joins us now. Good morning, Seema.
Good morning, Savannah and Joe. I like that healthcare package, by the way. Let's pivot to the world of travel, though that's getting a lot of attention this morning. Airlines seem to be resorting to a new strategy to respond to the collapse in travel we've seen due to the pandemic. A Wall Street Journal reporting that Alaska Air ran sales this summer offering an entire row for the price, get this, of one ticket, while European carrier Ryanair offering 2-for-1 specials. Now, these deals are aimed at drumming up demand and to keep some cash coming in as airlines are keeping much of their fleets parked. Analysts say the priority has been to drop prices low enough to fill the few planes they have flying so they can just break even. On to restaurants. A restaurant chain heading for a bankruptcy amid the pandemic. That is FIC Restaurants, which operates the iconic Friendly's brand on the East Coast. It unfortunately has filed Chapter 11. It will sell its assets to an investment group. Nearly all of Friendly's 130 company-owned and franchise locations will remain open depending on local guidelines. This is the second time in the past decade the company has filed for bankruptcy. Savannah and Joe, back to you.
So much.
A group of parents in Florida is suing a school board for requiring students to wear face masks. They argue the Sarasota County Board's policy is not in their children's best interests and denies them a right to an equal education. NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos joins us now to help break down this lawsuit. So, Danny, the Sarasota County School Board's vice chair told NBC News that their mask policy follows guidelines set by the CDC. Does the school board have the authority to establish and enforce such a policy?
Almost certainly, for two independent reasons. Number one, for over 100 years, the Supreme Court has held that the government in times of emergency and pandemic has considerable powers to force people to do things like get vaccines. But secondly, school boards in public schools are allowed to have dress codes. And there are constitutional limitations. For example, you can't differentiate between gender and impose more stringent requirements on girls as opposed to boys. But a face mask requirement is universal. Everybody has to wear it, and there doesn't appear to be any rule about what you write on it, like the message that would implicate the First Amendment. So it's hard to see what the real constitutional challenge will be. The parents say equal protection, but I don't necessarily see an equal protection challenge here.
Yeah, so that's what I was wondering is, the lawsuit claims the policy affects the right to an equal education. Is that a strong argument?
Not as far as I can see. Here's what I think their argument is. They've submitted affidavits, at least the parents have, that their children have these severe allergies and the masks worsen the severe allergies. Two things here. Number one, who cares if the parents put in affidavits? The parents are not doctors. They're not scientific experts. And part two of who cares is it seems to me, as a chronic sufferer of allergies myself, that masks help with allergies. They prevent all those little particles that make me sneeze and snot all day. So not only is the parents' affidavits that their children are being singled out for their allergies not effective scientifically, it also makes no scientific sense. Parents should be happy that kids are wearing masks if they have chronic allergies. It keeps out the stuff. Listen, I don't like wearing a mask. It's not comfortable, but less of those particles are getting up my nose, and I'm not sneezing and grossing everybody out all over the place.
We appreciate that, Danny. So masks are obviously a new thing, a very 2020 thing, but is there any sort of legal precedent for a lawsuit like this one?
There are several. First, people have challenged the government's power to order them to do things during pandemics. And like I've said, the Supreme Court, since the Jacobson case in Massachusetts over 100 years ago, has generally upheld the government's power. And of course, people have been challenging school dress codes since Tinker v. Des Moines, wearing black armbands, which in light of today's dress codes seems pretty tame after 40, 50 years.
All right, Danny, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
there's a requirement in Florida causing some backlash. Standardized testing. High school students still need to take the SAT or ACT to get into the state's public universities. That's despite the pandemic forcing widespread test cancellations. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce is back with us. She's been busy reporting on how this decision is changing students' futures.
Anyone who's taken the SAT or ACT can tell you it is stressful under the best of circumstances. And with good reason. The higher you score, the more attractive your college applications are. But add a global pandemic that's forcing test cancellations, and students have even more to worry about.
My mom and my brother are very high risk, so I was thinking about it the whole test.
Maria Martinez is a senior in high school. She's also the student advisor for the Miami-Dade Public School Board.
I didn't perform as well as I thought I would because I was under those conditions. Nobody was wearing masks. We weren't following social distancing. I'm hoping that I can take it again, but to find another testing center is nearly impossible.
The SAT the last couple of times has been canceling about 50%. Most of these are administered at schools on weekends. Many of these schools continue to be closed.
Jeff Salingo is the author of Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions.
Before the pandemic, there were more than 1,000 colleges and universities in the United States who were so-called test optional. And when the pandemic hit and it was starting to become clear that students were going to have difficulty taking the SAT or the ACT, more than 500 colleges over the summer went test optional.
Florida is the only state still requiring test scores for admission to its public universities. The University of Florida alone has more than 35,000 undergrads.
I've talked to families who have traveled hours and even stayed overnight in hotels in order to go to another state or another town to take the test.
As of September, 60% of high school seniors in Florida did not have a test score.
Us low-income students, we can't afford to travel these far distances.
Some students were able to take a test.
We drove 2 hours, stayed in a hotel overnight.
But the conditions were far from ideal.
The test proctor asked to see the inside of my mask to see if there was anything written in it for cheating purposes.
Even before the pandemic, the tests were controversial. The first SAT was administered nearly 100 years ago to help standardize the college admissions process. But is the system really fair?
The pro camp really thought that admissions tests level the playing field for students who came from different high schools. The biggest argument against the ACT and SAT is that it is highly correlated with family income. In other words, wealthier students do better and poorer students don't, because you could pay to take the test more often and you could pay to get test prep.
In Florida, test scores are a key factor in securing statewide scholarships.
Some scholarships, such as Bright Futures, depending on your score, they'll cover 75% or 100%.
The fact that the SAT and ACT is tied to the state merit-based scholarship is one of many reasons that the Florida board is unwilling to go test optional. If they drop the test score requirement and they only use GPA, will more students then qualify for the scholarship, and it will end up costing the state more money.
But Maria is worried about her future. She's supposed to take the SAT this weekend, and testing sites are already starting to close.
A lot of students are prepared to already schedule another testing site.
Florida's reluctance to go test optional could come back to bite them. Applications to Florida State University are down 32% this year. The University of Central Florida down 21%. Now, this could be for other reasons like financial hardship from the pandemic. But now, students are looking at all options.
Plenty of friends tell me that they're going to take a gap year this year. They haven't been able to take the SAT, and they're really relying on these scholarships.
If they haven't changed it by now, I'm very skeptical that they will change it.
Good morning, I'm Savannah Sellers.
I'm Joe Fryer. We're just one day away from the election, and here is your morning news now. Election Eve, 2 campaigns in key battleground states with a final message to voters. Our NBC News political team is on the campaign trail with just one day until the election. Plus, politics and a pandemic, how the coronavirus is affecting voters' decisions at the polls. Also,
Baby is scared of 4 years more. Quoth the Clinton,
We lost before.
Saturday Night Live starts with what it calls a Halloween horror story. Kate McKinnon returns as Hillary Clinton with a message to voters for the final show before Election Day. More highlights ahead. And we know there will be one more SNL, by the way, next weekend. There wasn't originally supposed to be, but they will have sort of a post-election episode. So we'll have to see what they come up with there.
Oh, absolutely.
But first, we are in the final sprint to the finish line.
Tomorrow is, of course, Election Day, and the candidates are barnstorming battleground states. We begin our coverage with NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker in Philadelphia. Kristen, good morning.
Hi, Savannah and Joe. Good morning to both of you. In this final sprint, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be crisscrossing all four corners of the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania. Of course, Democrats lost here in 2016, so they're pulling out all the stops to win it back. And for Biden, who is a son of Scranton, this fight is personal. Joe Biden closing out his campaign in battleground Pennsylvania. In a fiery address last night, urging voters in Philadelphia to turn out in force.
In 2 days, we can put an end to a presidency that has divided this nation.
Earlier Sunday, the former vice president aiming to rally critical African-American voters at a Souls to the Polls event with faith leaders.
We're going to act to deliver racial justice in America.
Biden also responding to a report President Trump is planning to declare victory on election night, even if all of the results are not in. A report the president has denied.
Our response is the president's not going to steal this election.
Still, the results in Pennsylvania likely won't be known on Tuesday. By law, the state cannot start counting its millions of mail-in ballots until Election Day. The state's Secretary of State urging patience.
I expect that the overwhelming majority of ballots in Pennsylvania, those mail-in absentee ballots, as well as in-person ballots, will be counted within a matter of days.
The Biden campaign looking to boost turnout in a state the president won by only 44,000 votes in 2016.
I think Joe Biden will win by about 4%. He'll win the Philadelphia suburbs by a much greater margin than Hillary did, and he'll hold down the margin of loss in rural Pennsylvania.
In the suburbs of Philadelphia, voters are mixed. You voted for President Trump in 2016.
Yes,
You're not voting for him now. Why?
No, I switched parties because I feel like a lot of the things they said that were going to get done, they didn't even start on those issues.
Why President Trump?
Because I feel that he's doing a great job and we still need him in office.
Some Democrats are privately worried Biden has not been visible enough in other key swing states. Campaign aides argue it has been all hands on deck, noting former President Obama made the case for Biden at events in Michigan over the weekend.
Joe Biden is my brother. I love Joe Biden.
Kristen, we just heard from former President Obama there, but what else are Democrats doing in these final hours?
Well, they're going to flood the zone, Savannah, including former President Barack Obama, who will be campaigning in critical Florida today, as well as Georgia. Kamala Harris has several stops here in Pennsylvania. She's going to end her night right here in Philadelphia with singer John Legend. For his part, Joe Biden is going to be in Cleveland, Ohio, of course, another big battleground state. He has 3 stops here in Pennsylvania. He caps out his evening in Pittsburgh with Lady Gaga. Savannah.
Kristen, thank you so much.
President Trump and Joe Biden are crisscrossing swing states in an effort to ramp up as much support as possible before the election. NBC News White House correspondent Peter Alexander joins us with more on that. Good morning, Peter.
Hey, Joe, good morning to you. So the president wrapping up his last rally of the weekend early this morning in Florida. The president and his allies are drawing confidence not from the polls that show him trailing, but from the size of his crowds. And really, to understand what's happening in this race, you have to watch where it's happening. President Trump making 5 stops today, ending in Grand Rapids, Michigan late tonight, the same place.
Ever wonder why so many people say they want to learn guitar, but very few actually learn to play? It's simple. Too many people try to learn with YouTube videos, and guess what? It doesn't work.
Subscribe.
Hi everybody and welcome. My name's Alison, the online piano and the online violin tutor.
Now today I'm going to do a video on memory and how to memorize music. I did a video with one of my students.
Veuillez prendre note de ce sujet pour un devoir à faire ce soir à la maison. Ouvrez les guillemets. Pourquoi les poésies de Jules Slovaki, ce grand poète, contiennent-elles une beauté immortelle qui éveille l'enthousiasme? Fermez les guillemets. À cet endroit du cours, un des élèves se tortilla nerveusement et gémit. Mais puisque moi, je ne m'enthousiasme pas du tout, je ne suis pas du tout enthousiasmé, ça ne m'intéresse pas. Je ne peux pas en lire plus de 2 strophes et même ça ne m'intéresse pas. Mon Dieu, comment est-ce que ça pourrait m'enthousiasmer puisque ça ne m'enthousiasme pas? L'élève se rassit, les yeux exorbités comme s'il sombrait dans un abîme. Devant sa confession naïve, le maître faillit s'étrangler. « Pas si fort, par pitié, siffla-t-il Galkiewicz. Vous serez collé. Vous voulez ma perte. Vous ne vous rendez pas compte de ce que vous dites. Mais je ne peux pas comprendre, moi. Je ne peux pas comprendre comment ça m'enthousiasme puisque ça ne m'enthousiasme pas. Le professeur, comment cela peut-il ne pas vous...
Ouais, 40 minutes, c'est ok. Мордор, привет из Мордора называется. Киргиз нет, отматывать не надо. ступени. Нет, там не ЕГЭ. Ну, так. Ну нет, так же все. Ой, нет, где-то какое дело, блин. Ну, я понял. Мало ли, вот там кто-то сидит в обезьяннике там. Мне вообще плевать. Мне такое, что я должен про это знать, что ли, что-то. Нет, нет, другой вопрос. Нет. Что ты себе здесь не можешь объяснять? Нет, это понятно, кому надо? Мало ли что там надо, блин. Это стол уже, блин, быстро.